welcome to a special edition of In the Box, our Penguins podcast here on DK Sports Radio. I'm Dejan Kovacevic, joined here by Chris Bradford.
Great to be here.
And we are going to have some fun here because you can do this kind of thing now, these lists, and you can make them for anything, can't you? And everyone's interested. No matter what it is, if it's a list, it's cool.
Yeah, I think it's a barroom discussion that is very popular nowadays, the list. Always great for debates.
Oh, yeah, and clickbaits as long as we're looking for things that rhyme. And that's not that we're interested in that sort of thing. But the Penguins have had some not great, but phenomenal, legendary, all-time players over the course of their 51 seasons. One of them, in my opinion, is the greatest player who ever lived, certainly the most talented player. And we'll get to him in the completely suspense-free number one choice at the end of this. But we're going to count down the top 5 Penguins of all time. But we're going to start by noting here, and I'm looking on Chris's list here, that there are no defensemen on the list. And we did discuss them, though, didn't we?
We did. I mean, they've had, I hate to be like, what's that called, recency bias, the most recent guy.
Yep.
Chris Letang obviously is the best true Penguins defenseman. I mean, this is a guy
over time.
He's going to spend the prime
most
of
accomplished.
His career in a Pittsburgh uniform. The Penguins have obviously had a lot of great players come through there, defensemen.
Sure, and I mean,
Murphy.
Larry Murphy's in the Hall of Fame. Paul Coffey's a first ballot Hall of Famer who had some not a ton of seasons in Pittsburgh, but great ones that he did. A vital part of building up to the first cup. Before that, Randy Carlyle was and remains the only Norris Trophy winner after the one great year that he had manning that Eddie Johnston power play. And then you go back to the 70s, and Dave Burrows is the one that everyone will talk about, a defensive stay-at-home, real tough guy, always got the job done kind of defenseman. But there's no defenseman who ends up on the list of the top 5 players of all time.
No, in fact, you were mentioning Dave Burrows and some other guys. I mean, you could go, Sergei Zubov and Kevin Hatcher.
Zubov is a fair one to bring up, yes.
Sergei Gonchar.
Mm-hmm.
But again, guys that had their better years in other uniforms. From a strictly Penguin standpoint, Chris Letang is definitely the guy. You could make a pretty compelling case also for Paul Coffey, but he's a guy that's going to fall off of this list just because of not here long enough.
Well, I'm going to throw in one name just for argument's sake that maybe someday will be elevated into this conversation. Don't laugh. Justin Schultz. He cannot be – I saw the face you just made.
Radio can't.
I know. They can't. That's why I had to describe it. But Justin Schultz can't fairly be judged by including his Edmonton career because we haven't set this up yet, but our criteria for this list is your time in Pittsburgh. That's important to note, by the way.
Yeah, and Justin Schultz.
He was your number one defenseman in a Stanley Cup championship.
Something to be said for that. I mean,
how many guys that we already mentioned have that to their credit?
Not too many Cup winners. I mean, this is a guy who played last year, I think, at a Norris Trophy level for some time of it.
For a good period, yep.
And you win a Stanley Cup and you're manning the point on the power play. I think he's a guy who. I think he's kind of destined to be in that second tier group. I don't see as
I haven't lost my mind here. I'm not putting him into I'm just saying that you can't, for the guys that are on the current team, you can't rule out that someone like that would, especially with the progress that we've already seen from him in Pittsburgh.
And I was just about to say, and you can't rule out, he's still got a long career ahead of him. So, we've only seen just probably the beginning of Justin Schultz.
So, without further ado, and no one actually even knows what ado is, we're going to get to our top 5, and let's start with number 5.
Yeah, we're going with the goaltender.
The goaltender, singular, he said.
Yes, the goaltender who holds just about every single record, and I think literally every record for goalie in Pittsburgh uniform, or at least the ones that matter, and that's going to be Marc-Andre Fleury.
Yeah, it's not a slam dunk for Fleury, and I say that as someone who disliked Tom Barrasso as much as anyone else in the Pittsburgh media corps. But when Barrasso came along in the trade, the only good trade that Tony Esposito made in his brief tenure as GM, because he felt very strongly about getting a goalie, he picks up Barrasso from the Sabres, who was a Vezina winner, a Calder winner as an 18-year-old out of high school, and he comes to Pittsburgh and he backstops 2 Stanley Cup championships. that can't get just casually tossed out. And he also did it, Chris, as you remember, with a style and a mentality that you needed playing behind a bunch of offensive guys.
Yeah, that was a totally different era where he was left out to dry a lot of nights, and he always pulled through for the Penguins. And the thing that gets lost about Barrasso, people forget sometimes just how great of a puck handling goaltender he was.
Brilliant.
Most points
by
a goalie. Not sure if he's the best one at it, but he certainly has the numbers to back it up.
Yeah. That said, this one goes to Fleury because Fleury has all of the records. Fleury is wearing 3 rings, and the fact that Fleury, with this last championship, not to take away anything that Matt Murray did, but Fleury faced the 2 toughest opponents. I really believe that the Penguins faced last year. I don't know how I feel. I'm happy it doesn't matter, but I don't know how I feel about whether or not Matt Murray would have beaten the Blue Jackets and especially the Capitals.
Yeah, I'll definitely go the Capitals series. That was definitely Marc-Andre Fleury's. If that's that turned out to be his swan song in a Penguins uniform, I was just so happy for him because last year he could really feel like a part of that championship team. I mean, obviously Marc-Andre Fleury, he's almost become deified, I think, since he's left town. But I was just so happy for him to get those last 2 Stanley Cups because if you remember the rough years in 12, 13, and 14, he was brutally bad against Philadelphia in 12.
And the Islanders and all that. Oh, geez.
So
and
bad.
I remember him. It was in Nassau Coliseum downstairs by the locker room, literally slamming his forehead against a white cement wall while Thomas Vokoun was standing right next to him, fielding questions from reporters. He toughed it out to become a true playoff goaltender as much as you're ever going to see. He's not just the classy person that everybody talks about. Let's not ever underappreciate how great his actual goaltending was.
Yeah, very good.
And is.
Yes.
Okay,
and
yeah.
now we're seeing it again.
But again, we're
Vegas.
talking just about Pittsburgh here.
Yes.
Number 4, and don't bite our heads off for this, and I can tell you that we did, Chris and I discussed these things before going on, and we agreed, right? We had some back and forth.
We concurred, and we agreed upon Evgeny Malkin.
At 4. And that's not going to be super popular, I don't think.
No, but I think it's more of a testament to the 3 guys ahead of him than it says anything about Evgeny Malkin. I think on maybe 25 other teams, he might be number 1.
Oh, it might be higher than that. Evgeny Malkin has been literally a generational player, and yet somehow has always been in something or somebody's background, whether it's the top 100 list or being drafted behind Alexander Ovechkin. And yet at the same time, his personality has lent itself to being exactly that. Like, he never has needed to be the guy. There aren't many examples of that really in the history of professional sports.
No, you kind of stole what I was going to say.
Sorry.
That's a remarkable thing about him is, and they've been together now, Crosby and Malkin, now for over 10 years?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's a long time to be a number 2.
And happily at number 2.
He's been the number 2. I mean, you saw that Jordan Stahl, he was the number 3, and he couldn't take it at some point. He wanted out because he wanted to
be the guy
profile.
somewhere. Yeah, it's his personality, I think. Look, we all see his talent, but I wish more people could appreciate seeing how comfortable and happy he is in that role, and go to Sid. And yet, Chris, at the same time, when he has needed to be the guy and to stand up, to say something, to step up with a huge performance, he's done that too.
Yeah, he's definitely got a flair for the dramatic, to step up his game sometimes in some of the biggest games of Penguins lore.
Yes.
I think back to that 2009 conference final against Carolina.
Oh, the backhander.
He was best player on the planet.
Unbelievable. He was doing Mario-type things out there. And then, even then, if you go back to the massive struggles that he had to score in the 2016 Cup, and then he had just basically resigned himself once they got to San Jose that he was just going to be the best two-way forward conceivable. And if he scored, he scored. And, of course, he does end up scoring on the great tip on the pass from Phil Kessel. He he just doesn't deserve to be number 4 on any franchise's list.
It's a tough list. It's like Mount Rushmore. Somebody has to be Teddy Roosevelt on this thing.
Well, somebody does, but the difference between Malkin and 2 of the guys that are ahead here on our list is that he can and almost surely will keep climbing. We can agree on that.
Oh, certainly. I mean, what is he, 31?
Oh yeah, he's a child. And in terms of the lifespan of a professional athlete, he still has a lot of years and a lot of gears, I should say, left, because he can still get those legs moving, and as long as he has those, he doesn't have to alter his game for years to come.
Yeah, well, I've always wondered about Evgeny Malkin, and it's probably not going a little off subject. Will he finish his career in Pittsburgh, or will he go at some point back to Russia? I think that's always been a question I've had. What say you?
Yeah, you know what? I mean, he's always been so happy here. That said, you can see, we all follow his Instagram accounts and everything, and we see the blast that he has every summer when he goes home, and he's got all his buddies and his brothers and Vlad Putin and everybody else in tow. But I think that Malkin also has a genuine appreciation and understanding for his special place in Penguins history, and it's only going to get better.
So obviously if Evgeny Malkin is number 4, then that gives us number 3, and that's got to be Jaromir Jagr. For my money, one of the best pure wingers to ever play the game, and certainly the best European to ever play the game. Jagr in his prime, and Pittsburgh really was his prime. He moved on to a lot of teams, obviously, later in his career.
And did a lot of different things and had different styles of play, but yeah.
I don't know if that tarnishes his legacy in the game, but
well, if it does, take Gretzky's number down. Numbers, I should say, with multiple jerseys.
Something to be said for longevity too. But I think during his time in Pittsburgh, it's kind of like the Barry Bonds thing. Had he never done steroids, Jaromir Jagr probably, if he never had left Pittsburgh in 2001, would probably still be a Hall of Famer, at least strongly in contention, just for what he did.
Yeah, 5 scoring titles.
5 scoring titles in
first ballot. He could have retired right when they brought Chris Beach, Ross Lupaschuk, and Michael Civic here.
Oh, I forgot about those names.
Oh, dude, I just dropped all 3 of them on you without looking too.
Chris Beach, that is a name I haven't thought about in a long, long while. Jagr, and I kind of mentioned Barry Bonds, the way he left the team.
It was ugly.
It was ugly.
Yeah, uglier than Bonds' actually.
Yeah, and left Jaromir Jagr kind of a polarizing figure here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, it did, and some of that was fair because he said some stupid things on the way out, said some stupid things later, and then he committed the ultimate sin because with the next generation, which didn't see Jagr the way you and I did in person and appreciate everything that he'd done for the Penguins, their first experience with him was waiting for him to sign with the Penguins and then instead signing with the evil Flyers.
Yeah, I forgot about that, the flirtation that the Penguins had with Jagr. What was it, 2012?
Yeah, and it was more than that. I think they were serious. Ray Shero was going to bring him in. They were pretty much to the point where they had kind of figured out what they were going to pay him and everything, and then he signs with Philadelphia and he becomes, a real villain here for a while. I mean, people really went at him.
Yeah, and even before that, going back to his Rangers and Capitals days, wasn't very popular here to begin with those teams. But certainly Jagr, the player in his time, especially in Pittsburgh, just what a dynamic player. We're dating ourselves a little bit, but I feel bad that people don't remember Jagr with the Penguins. But his ability, a little bit, probably better than even Crosby. You couldn't knock him off the puck. He just had such strong legs, rear end. He was just
the gigantic rear end, right? And then he would use it like as a weapon on the rink to shield people off the puck, and he would make plays from that position that really no player, certainly no elite player, had ever tried that. I'm not suggesting that he was some kind of pioneer. That's just how he played, but it was unusual. He was not a conventional super slick Joe Sakic type superstar. No. You know what I mean?
No, that gets lost a little bit, just how big Jaromir Jagr was. He was 240, something like that. He's always been a 6'2.5", 240 guy, right? Yeah, that's a large number for a hockey player. You don't see too many 240s unless they're 6'5" and usually defensemen or something like that. Jagr as a winger was just unbelievable. There's so many highlight reel goals. I just always remember that one He scored against the Flyers. Yep.
Sliding.
I've never seen a goal
wax
like
the puck
that
out of the
before or
air.
since.
You'll never see one again either. The hand-eye, the concentration, the fight, everything about it. Amazing player, and a guy who I feel obligated to add here was a better captain than anybody could ever have dreamed. When Kevin Constantine gave him the C, it looked like the most pandering, give it to your best guy kind of move. But he ended up carrying the Penguins through a couple of playoff rounds when they really needed it the most, and he deserves a lot of credit for that and for the Penguins still being in Pittsburgh while I'm at it, because that was around bankruptcy time.
Yeah, there was a time there in the late 90s, early 2000s. Obviously, that was post Mario Lemieux, then post Ron Francis, where he really carried that team. I remember that 99 series against the New Jersey Devils. He somehow got them past New Jersey on the second-round series against Toronto. I think that was his crowning achievement in a Penguins uniform, and that's saying something because he had won 2 Stanley Cups, a few years before that.
5 scoring titles. You have to keep repeating that.
And 5 scoring titles. That's just a remarkable run.
MVP awards. He did it all. A truly classic, all-time, not in Penguins history, in hockey history player. So why is he at number 3? Well, that's because number 2 happens to be a guy who, at least in my mind, Chris, just passed Jágr on this particular list. And I would say, and I wrote this, and it was not well received at all, after the Boston series, when the Penguins scored just the 2 goals and were swept out of the Eastern Conference Final, especially because Jágr was actually on those Bruins and played great.
Right.
That I wrote that Crosby remains behind Jágr as the second greatest. That Crosby would be third. Jágr remains the second greatest player, and he'll do that until Crosby and or Gino get back to the top of the mountain. Well, they got back, and then they got back again, and Sidney Crosby put himself into a position where he's just on another world.
Yeah, by winning those 2 Stanley Cups, Crosby has certainly put himself in that discussion of not only being on the Mount Rushmore of the Penguins, but possibly of the NHL. People are talking him already, just 30 years old, just turned 30. Wins 3rd Stanley Cup. And it's legitimate discussions. Where does he belong with the Gretzkys, the Lemieux, the Howes, the Richards, the Bobby Orrs?
That's tough. I know, but that's going to be tough to break. Because each one of those guys has some kind of specific and special claim to fame. Lemieux, the most talented player who ever lived. Howe, Mr. Hockey, Mr. Tough Guy, embodies the combination that it takes. Gretzky with all the points that he had. Bobby Orr, there are still people that'll swear up, down, and sideways that Bobby Orr is the greatest hockey player who ever lived. You're going back further with the Rocket, but in the era of the Rocket, he was Babe Ruth, man. He was the first 50-goal scorer. He was scoring at a pace that no one else had ever touched, and all he did was win a Stanley Cup every single season.
Well, I think that the common
tough group.
That's that's the kind of the disciples, or what's that? The Last Supper. If you're one of those guys on those 10, that big picture of Jesus, and you're any one of those guys, you're doing pretty good. So I think if you're Sidney Crosby and you're in that discussion, there's no shame in being number 6 on that list if that's where he ends up.
Do we have both Crosby and Jágr in the all-time top 10?
We do.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure Pittsburgh will be the only organization that's going to have 3 guys in that top 10.
You would think so, but but here's something for you on the Crosby subject. Is there a chance, any chance, think about this now before the reflexive answer, that he could end up number 1 on this list at some point in time?
Boy, I'm not even from Pittsburgh. I think that's sacrilege.
I know.
I give the standard answer. The best player when you're 12 years old is the best player now. And when I was 12 years old, Mario Lemieux was the best player. So that would have been about, 1985, 86 in that era. So, wow, I think Sid would probably have to win.
Yes, it comes down to cups.
Yeah,
because he can't catch him.
He's already got 3
points. It's a different era. Even if you start doing era-adjusted statistics and things like that, Sid's got 3 rings.
Yeah.
Mario's got 2. Well, he's got a lot more, but he had 2 as a player. I mean, the unfairness of the comparisons is, including the fact that when Mario came to the Penguins, they were just pure garbage.
Yeah, and when Crosby was there, they were just coming off the garbage.
But had a nice supporting cast for him. They didn't,
because two of those guys were on this list had just gotten there really year or two before, guys
Right.
like Malkin and Fleury. I would think to put him ahead of Lemieux, he would have to lap Lemieux. It can't be a 3-2 cup.
But it
advantage.
has to be in cups.
It has to be.
That's
cups.
the thing. It has to be cups, and even then, I don't see that it's feasible. It's almost like you'd have to come up with a different category in your mind for Sid, like greatest winner or something in that bracket.
Yeah, I mean, I think winning is what defines Sidney Crosby because of the era he plays in. There's no chance he's going to put up 185 points or crazy numbers like that.
No one will.
I would love to see somebody do it, because if Sidney Crosby can't do it or Alex Ovechkin can't do it, some of the best players of the last 15 years, and their numbers are nothing compared to what we saw with guys like Gretzky and Lemieux. But Crosby has certainly put himself in that discussion. But for me to get past Mario Lemieux, he would.
Yeah, just forget it.
Yeah.
Let's just forget it. And on that note, let's just get to number one, because there could never be any suspense on this one. But I will ask you, as it pertains to something that I just glossed over earlier, is Lemieux the greatest, most talented player of all time?
Most talented. I will definitely say most talented. I think if the hockey gods said, let's create the perfect hockey player, they would look at a 6'4" guy with the wingspan. He's a mythical figure in hockey. I mean, he was almost Paul Bunyan. I think he was, was he 6'4" they listed him at? He was taller than that.
No, he was 6'4.5", but then on his skates, I mean, he just looked.
Yeah. And
not that they all aren't wearing skates, but you know what I mean.
He's just a mythical figure. I mean, he was.
The long stick, the long reach, the fact that his stride was the stride of a smaller man. That was part when you watched him that looked unfair.
And the way he could slow the game down, he'd enter the zone, and he just made it look slow and easy and effortless. He was just the most, one of the most beautiful hockey players.
Yeah.
To throw out a word that you don't hear too often in hockey, but he's just so graceful.
There was a grace, and there was also a calm and a presence about him that's one of the many, many reasons that it's so hard to compare Lemieux and Crosby in any way. Crosby's approach to the game is to outskate it. He wants to go faster than the game. He wants to be the fastest thing, the fastest concept occurring on the ice. Lemieux was the puppeteer. He would slow it down. He would make you do something. He would make you look really stupid if you were a forward defending him, and probably not a whole lot better if you were a defenseman.
Ask Ray Bourque.
Oh, my. Well, that's just the one-on-one stuff. But I'm talking about you mentioning the pull-ups at the blue line, where he would pull up not in a way that Gretzky would. Gretzky would do that 360 and kind of wait for the trailer. Lemieux pulled up, and he had 700 different things he could do to you. And you didn't know what they were, so you just froze. You had nowhere to go. You had nothing to do, and you knew, unlike any other player, facing any other player in the league, that your coach actually wasn't going to be mad at you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No shame in Mario Lemieux beating him. I mean, he was as great a playmaker as he was a goal scorer. And I think he's the best. People talk about the Gretzky-Lemieux comparison. As far as goal scorers were concerned, it was no contest to me.
Viktor Tikhonov, the legendary Russian coach of the old Soviet Red Army teams, and this raised a lot of eyebrows at the time, but around the time of that Canada Cup, when Gretzky and Lemieux were briefly line mates, called Lemieux the greatest single goal scorer, finisher that he'd ever seen.
Yeah, you just have this picture of him in your mind, just big dude, just bearing down on a goaltender, always going top shelf, just a right-handed shot, just a remarkable player.
I loved your Paul Bunyan line, because one of the things that ended up being so cool about Mario's comeback was that he had to reinvent himself, because he knew he didn't have the legs that he had when he was younger. He wasn't going to be scorching guys one-on-one. He wasn't going to be going inside out on Sean Chambers and Neil Wilkinson to go in there on John Casey and those stubby little pads of his and work it around him. He knew that he had to do something different, so he became a trigger man. He became a gunner. He went from being the distributor to basically being Brett Hull in the latter part of his career, finishing from, remember all his bad angle shots?
Yeah, that was my first year covering hockey. Was that 2001 season, and that was when Lemieux came back mid-December or late December.
Late December, yep.
And a remarkable run. I mean, I'm trying to remember what his points were. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but like had he played a full season, he would have won.
He would have won. Yeah.
Yeah. And another scary thing, I think
he was 33 years old when he came back, or just 2 years older than Sidney Crosby, or 3 years older than just
Sidney Crosby is right now.
And he had to reinvent himself, so he ended up adding so many additional layers to his game that already included, this can't be stressed enough, that when he turned it on defensively, he was the best defensive forward in the game and or penalty killer, as Scotty Bowman has publicly said.
Yeah, Lemieux came a long way in that regards, and I think a lot of people point to that '87 Canada Cup to when he really started to become the Mario Lemieux. That's Mario Lemieux, and not kind of the '84-'85 era Lemieux.
He would just score a bunch of points and miss the playoffs,
and
right?
He became really the well-rounded player that.
And confident and assertive, and now he said, "Look, I'm with these guys. I'm playing right at a level, if not higher, than all these people. How about if we finally win something here, huh?"
And they finally did get the supporting cast around him, and Paul Coffey, I think, is one of the guys that who just fell off of this list, as maybe one of the guys who kind of pushed Lemieux to that level of being a Cup champion.
So to revisit our little list one last time, Chris, number 5.
Number 5 is Marc-Andre Fleury.
Number 4 was
Evgeny Malkin.
Number 3,
Jaromir Jagr.
Number 2,
Sidney Crosby.
And you don't even have to say number 1. Probably not.
66?
That's it. Probably not forever. This has been a special edition of our In the Box podcast on DK Sports Radio.